Welcome back to Right on Four Corners. I'm your host, DelSheree Spinner, and I am excited to be talking to Marie Parks. I ended up with a copy of her book, Flightless, from our friends over at Artemisia. For one, the cover really piqued my interest out of the batch that I was sent. I was like, ooh, that looks fun. And I had a lot of fun reading it, and it was a different, unique kind of story. So we're going to talk to Marie Parks this week about her book, Flightless. Marie, go ahead and introduce yourself.
Thanks so much. Yes, so I am a New Mexico-based author out of Albuquerque, and where I've lived since 2017, so coming up on 10 years here. And I have 3 traditionally published novels, but traditionally published with small presses, like Artemisia and also Not a Pipe Publishing, which is in Oregon. And I'm an asexual author, so that's one of the hallmarks of my work is that all of my novels feature an ace protagonist. I write fantasy and sci-fi, and I also am the founder of Sandia Starforger's Writers Retreats and Workshops, supporting speculative fiction writers down in the South Valley of Albuquerque.
Very cool. Like most authors, we have too many projects going on to really deal with in our day-to-day lives, but that just seems to be how our brains work. So I will come back to the workshops and the retreats that you do because I do find that really fun and interesting. But before I get off track, tell us a little bit about Flightless.
Sure. So Flightless is a fantasy heist. So, someone who enjoys maybe Six of Crows or Foundry Side or even just an Ocean's 11 movie kind of knows what to expect going in, right? It's about a bunch of thieves trying to steal a thing. But one of the things that I found motivating about writing this book is that it also has a lot of social justice themes. Because the society that this book takes place in is quite unjust. And so our main character and a lot of the characters in this thieving group are trying to navigate that unjust society as they go about their museum heist.
And speaking to the injustice of the society, tell us a little bit about the different groups of people and how they've kind of been basically structured into a caste system and just like what those differences are between the people.
Sure. So there's 3 broad different groups of people, and it's based on really their physiology. So all of them pretty much look, human, just like us. But the top of the caste system are the flyers. So these are people who have wings. You can imagine kind of like an angel, right, with like feathery wings. And they are the people who generally are in power in government. They can own businesses. They have a lot of rights. They have most of the wealth. And then you have the low caste, which are people like our main character, Riff, who have, if you kind of imagine like a base jumping suit, there's like a bit of skin or like a flying squirrel or something, except not furry. They can glide. So they have what's called glide sheaths. So they can't go up, but they can glide down. And so they're like the low class. They have limited education opportunities. They can't really own land over at least a certain amount of size. They're not allowed to read. And of course, this comes with poverty. And then there's an even lower caste, which are people that look truly just like us. But they can't fly, they can't glide. They're called ground-bound. And so these are the low of the low. And yeah, where you're sort of, what you're born into really dictates what your life looks like.
And I was wondering, 'cause I've read so much more history and historical fiction since doing the show. It's been great because I've learned a lot about different places and different cultures. So there were different things that I was recognizing. Like right now I'm reading a historical novel that partly takes place in 1800s Scotland and kind of their system there with the crofters and them basically like being burned out after a certain point because the ruling class wanted their land. And so I was wondering, were there particular societies or historical periods that you used kind of like as a baseline to start building your world? Or was it just kind of a compilation of your own ideas and what you already knew, just in general knowledge that you put together?
Yeah, kind of both. I also love history and reading, and so I'm sure through osmosis, I picked up a lot of inspiration from all over because I think, unfortunately, this is one of those things that's in human nature is that we do like to sort of categorize, which is maybe fine, but then the categorization can become discrimination pretty quickly. I grew up in the U.S. South, and the discrimination is still on display in many ways there. And this is unfortunately traditional around the world. But the other part of the inspiration for this is that I described the three castes, and our main character is sort of in the middle one. I mean, I called it low just because there's just this level of poverty for both of the lower castes, but it is the middle of the three. And I was really interested in what is the experience like for someone who's sort of in the middle, like in some ways has some privilege. And Riff has good friends, and Riff has loving parents, and Riff has a history with some people in power. And in other ways, he doesn't have a lot of privilege, right? He's very poor, and he is really struggling, and he's experienced some close familial loss. Various ways he's got privilege and doesn't have privilege, and what is his role and what is his responsibility in this unfair world, to sort of act from the middle and to try to make a difference from the middle. And at the beginning of the book, he's really in survival mode. He can't really think about making a broader difference, but that changes a bit over the course of the book. And that's something that I also experience, right? There are ways in which I have privilege, and there's ways in which I don't. And so that was another thing I was thinking about as I was constructing this world.
And I really liked that you brought in that just because one person is in kind of a disadvantaged or less advantaged group, that doesn't exactly mean that they recognize that across the board. So Riv has to deal with at one point, they try to bring in another member into the group who is a groundbound person. And there's some prejudice there, and there's some distrust and some hesitance in accepting that this other person can be trustworthy and talented and skilled. And I appreciated that you brought that in, because I think we don't always recognize that just because we're treated a specific way that we don't like, we often still end up doing that to other people without realizing. And it really takes a moment to step back and do some self-reflection critically. Be like, am I doing the same things that I don't like being done to me? I'm doing those to other people. And just where our internal self-value is. And it made me think, I want to say this was back in high school, maybe, so forever ago. We were learning about the suffrage movement and everything that was going on during that time. And I remember reading something that my teacher brought in about how Frederick Douglass was a big supporter of women's suffrage. But when it came down to the point of should Black men get the vote or should women get the vote, he was like, yeah, Black men are still more important than you. So I'm going to take that side over, well, everybody should get the vote. Even in that case where, he had experienced a lot of brutality and discrimination and just, a horrible society of how Black people were treated, he still was like, yeah, but, I'm still going to put men above women, because he still had some of those inborn or taught, whatever it is, where he believed that there was still a difference in value between men and women. And it made me think of that. And I was just really glad to see that you brought that in, because I think that that's something that gets left out at times, that we don't see things clearly just because we've experienced something like that we don't like and that we feel is unfair. We still end up doing the same thing to other people way too often.
Yeah, I think there's a measure of comfort in claiming what power one can have, especially when one doesn't have a lot of access or power or support. And sometimes that does come at others' expense. But, I wrestled with this a little bit with Riff, because I thought, this makes him an unlikable character. The fact that he has prejudice and it's on display, and it's not cute. And so I really I just thought, but this is, like you said, this is sort of what we've seen over and over again. Thanks for that example of Frederick Douglass. And I don't think that makes someone like that any less of a hero, or someone that we still remember and appreciate their contributions. It's just kind of part of it. And I think the thing that I felt was important was, I think this needs to be part of his character arc, his growth, Riff's growth, so that, maybe he starts prejudiced, but by the end of this book, maybe he's actually starting to recognize that a little bit and change some of his attitudes, maybe not all at once, but that I wanted to show that like that growth is actually going to be instrumental for his success and I think for him to be the hero that I wanted to put on the page ultimately.
Yeah, I mean, I think it made him more complex and realistic because people are human. You know?
Yeah. Yeah.
We
Even with their
just,
weird skin flaps.
yeah. But it is. I mean, that's even in our own lives. I mean, I think if people really look at themselves critically, we see that we do stuff like this all the time and often without realizing. But there are so few, and bless the people who are just like 100% genuinely good and always doing the right thing. It's really hard to do as a human being because we have survival instincts, we have basic needs that we're trying to meet. We have so many competing factors in who we are as living beings that it's impossible to always make the right choice and completely see the situation and not have that like just natural selfishness of protecting and taking care of yourself first. Like that's just part of who we are.
Right. Right.
So I enjoyed that your
Yeah.
characters were complex and that I think especially, for younger readers who would read this to see that like when they make mistakes or when they have something that they're not like 100% proud of their decision or their behavior or their thoughts. It's like, yeah, we all have those moments and hopefully you can pause and reflect and then grow from that rather than continue doing it.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, that means a lot. I really appreciate that.
One of the other things I wanted to ask you about as far as your world building, there are some surprises and secrets that we won't reveal because we want people to read the book. But you had to build like a history of these different groups of people and where they came from, and then weave in some of the surprises that the readers get to know eventually. What is your process for world building?
So I have a lot of writer friends, and one of the joys in my life is finding out everyone else's process because I feel like everyone's so different. So for me, I'm very much a character writer. Like I think about characters first, and then I build a world and a scenario that helps them be interesting and do interesting things. At least that's the goal. And so for me, I wouldn't say the world building is an afterthought because it truly is a joy. And I love a secondary world like this where you really get to invent every aspect of it. But I've said before in conversations with folks, and I still stand by this, that my world building is about 1 micron deeper than the story. I'm just not someone who really gets too immersed in trying to like build a whole language or build, the economic system and, all the things that aren't on the page. Really, I probably haven't thought about them too much unless it's something that, I might want to explore in like another story in this world. So that may be an unsatisfying answer, but I think it's also just part of me trying to be as efficient as possible. I mean, as it is, it already takes me 3 to 5 years to write a novel. So, I feel like I have to kind of find those efficiencies where I can.
Oh, I understand that. Yeah. As much as I enjoy reading historical fiction, there's the time commitment aspect of it that I'm like, yeah, no, that's not something
Yeah.
I'm going to spend time doing. But oh, it's interesting with world building because I've in the past been very similar with like, I'm very character focused when I write. So sometimes the
Mm,
world building, just develops as I write and with whatever the needs of the story and the character are, it's like, okay, yeah, let me delve into that a little bit more. But I have found as I've kind of been, well, slowly starting a process of revising and eventually republishing all of my books under my own publishing company and changing my name after getting married and stuff. And I've noticed as I've gone back through some of my old stuff that admittedly, like early on in my writing, I didn't have a strong critique group or partners to work with as far as all of that. And even with my traditionally published books, I often did not have the greatest editors in the world to help with that.
mm,
And as I've looked
mhm.
back at them, there's times where it's like, oh man, like I really left that like underdeveloped, or I got to book 2 in a series and was like, well, crap, that doesn't really make sense anymore with what I wanted to do with this. So
Yes,
I
I
have been
resonate with this so
trying.
much.
I've been trying to learn to like do a little bit more world building and planning ahead of time. One of the 2 projects I'm working on right now is very enveloped in the world of these different dimensions. And so it's like I'll write so far and then I'll be like, wait, how does that work? I don't actually understand what I'm trying to build here. And it's been really like fits and starts with that one because I'll have an idea of the story and the characters and then be like, wait, how does this make sense with what I have planned later? And so I've really had to like stop and try to figure out, especially like the rules of the world, because it's like interdimensional traveling built on karma and all kinds of crazy things that I'm trying to make work. And I have, with this one particularly, it's like I actually have to figure out how this world works before I can write a coherent story in it. So
That sounds so cool,
it's
though.
a different process than what I've done before, and it's been a really big learning experience so far. One day maybe I'll actually
For
finish
sure.
it.
I believe in you.
We'll see if the school year
Yes,
coming up doesn't kill me. I'll try to
oh,
keep going with it throughout the year.
yes, that is also, I think, the great side of so many creative people is you're trying to be creative while also doing like the things that make money,
Yeah.
keep a roof over your head, and all that kind of
Yeah.
stuff. But yeah, I think in the world of Flightless, like in a lot of ways, the world isn't that complicated, to my opinion. Like it's yes, there's this caste system, and we would call it magic, they would call it technology. I mean, basically like magic electricity, but that's kind of about it. But, I've certainly written before. In fact, my debut series, that's set in our own world, and yet it is more complicated. And I find myself bashing my head against the wall writing book 3 right now, thinking like, why didn't we, actually it's co-written, why didn't we like, not that I'm foisting the blame on my co-author, but just saying like, why didn't we think about, how this part of the magic system works or how this or that works? So I definitely resonate with what you're saying. And I think that was one of the things that was kind of nice about Flightless is that it was a little bit simpler, even though it is a completely made up world.
There's a lot for simplicity.
Yes.
I think sometimes I'm like, maybe that's why, because I started out with writing in like YA paranormal, mythological type stuff. And kind of at some point, I was just like, all right, I just want to write in the real world and not have all that other stuff, which was a challenge because you didn't have like fantastical things to throw in to move the plot along. It all had to be like real world things. So that was
Yeah.
interesting learning how to develop a story without external factors. But once I kind of got used to that, it was like, oh, all right, I don't have to figure out a world. I live in
Yeah.
the world. I know how it works.
The world building is all around us.
Yeah, it's like not that you don't still, develop the world of the story.
Sure.
There's still a lot with that, but it's like you don't have to figure out, yeah, like is it electricity or is it magic or is it a combination of both?
Yes.
Sometimes that's nice, but
Definitely. Definitely.
well, and the other part that you had to develop is your actual heist and going through
Oh,
like the
yeah.
planning process and the steps. And I'm curious if it's similar to like developing a mystery. You don't necessarily have like clues with a heist that the reader puts together, but you do lead the reader along with how is this going to work? What are they going to figure out? What are the like potential traps and pitfalls and things like that? So I was curious how you approached planning and building in the different elements of the heist to keep it interesting and engaging all the way through.
Yeah. So you'll know this term, I'm sure, and we'll see about the listeners, but I'm what's called a pantser. And so like I write by the seat of my pants. Typically I don't really plan that much. And then I do my revisions afterwards. So I end up with sometimes hundreds of thousands of words of prose that don't make it into the final because they didn't actually fit where the story ultimately ended up going. Fortunately, I enjoy the pain and suffering of writing, so it's a joy all the way through, even when I'm struggling. And so that kind of worked for me for a while. And then I thought, okay, I'm writing a heist. I don't know if I can do that, but that's just the only way I know how to write. And so I'm going to put a shout out for just the best resource I had during this, which is a class by Mary Robinette Kowal, who, if listeners don't know her, she's a multi-Hugo Nebula Locus Award-winning author. most famous for the calculating stars, but she had a class called How to Write a Heist, I think is what it's called. And I took the class and she said, look, fantasy, science fiction, all of these genres are really just sort of set dressing. It's really just the vibes that make it fantasy or science fiction. But there are certain genres like romance, like a heist, like a mystery, where the reader expects certain things to happen, even if they're not like with a checklist. It's just kind of, you feel the flow of it. And that's because there's patterns of these types of genres. And so she taught me the beat to be expecting along the way. And so that was so invaluable because for the first time, I wasn't just writing a fantasy novel, I was writing a fantasy heist. And so it was set dressing, but with expected things that were going to happen along the way. And that really helped shape the story. And yeah, I was more efficient with this process because I actually had things I was aiming for other than just basic sort of story structure to lean on. So I can't recommend her class on heist strongly enough for anybody who's thinking about writing one.
I like that mindset and even the language of it being a pattern and meeting expectations rather than a formula. Because I think that's something that certain genres, romance especially, but even certain aspects of like sci-fi and fantasy where it's like, oh, it's formulaic. It's not interesting. They're just writing the same story over and over. And there certainly is an element of that, I think, particularly in romance. And there's a group of readers who want the formulaic romance because they have very set expectations and they want those exact things. And that's perfectly fine because that's serving that group of readers and what they want. But I think sometimes readers and writers both kind of get into a mindset of like having to follow a formula. And well, this needs to happen at 20%. And this needs to happen at this point. And that's where I'm like, no, like I get like, in romance, we need the happily ever after. We have, the big fight or the thing that tears them apart. And then they've got to, figure out how to come back together. And we have these different things, but they have to be done in interesting and unique ways to hold the reader's attention. And with yours, I felt like you really accomplished that because I would say like two sides of it. The world was interesting. And being a reader who's new to the world, you're learning like, okay, what are the conflicts that they're going to face? What might not work the way they think it's going to? And, what are the problems that they're going to encounter, even when they think they have it figured out? That adds a fun element to it because you don't know for sure. You don't know if you know the world well enough yet to predict it. But then you also have the element of the characters and their complexity. And do you know for sure who you can trust and how things are going to end up and who's going to make a rash decision in a moment of panic or selfishness to save themselves over someone else? You don't know. And so yes, there are certain aspects of a heist storyline that you expect, but how are they all going to come together? That's what makes the story interesting.
I totally agree. I mean, I think in some ways there's never anything new under the sun. But the joy of reading a new book, even if it is in one of these genres that has expected beat, is how it all comes together. Because, well, this character is unique and this world is unique and the problems they're facing are unique. And this is why I love reading, right? And it's why I love writing too. But I will say there's sort of two types of heists that I was exploring as I was doing my, research, basically just sort of reading a bunch, watching a bunch. And there's the sort of heist where the main character or sort of your leader or your crew, usually it's like kind of the mastermind type person, they reveal something that they've known all along and it amazes everybody else on the crew, and that's how they kind of get through it. And then you also have, that it kind of feels like a gotcha to the reader, which can be fun. I didn't really want to do that. I would rather have written, and this is what I did do, I wrote a book where I wanted the reader to feel like they could trust Riff, that he was giving them all the information he had. And if something needs to be happening without the reader noticing it, that was something that I needed basically Riff to just be really focused on something else, or we needed to shift to another POV character so that anytime we're with him, as the point of view character. We feel like we can trust him. And when we get to the end, it's not like, oh, he's been hiding something from us all along, even though this has been from his perspective and like a tight third person point of view. So that was a choice I made. And there's sort of different types of heists. That felt important to me to feel like that trust between the reader and Griff could be realized.
Yeah, I think unless you're intentionally building in that unreliable narrator, and that's a critical part of the plot line, to just throw something out at the end and just be like, haha, we knew this thing you didn't do. There's a real risk of seriously annoying your reader by doing that.
I see it. Right. Like I see it in movies more, like heist movies more, because you're not actually in the brain of the person who came up with this like haha moment. It's harder, I think, in a novel.
Yeah.
And I've read it and I'm sure it can be done well, but I didn't trust myself to do it well.
Yeah, I think that would have to be like something practiced and really like studied in other novels that do it well before I would want to attempt it. I'm just going to end up writing an annoying character probably. Well, we are already starting to get short on time. I knew this was going to go fast because we were chatting a few minutes before we started recording and we were already having a great time. But as we start to wrap up, tell us about what you're working on now with your third book in your debut series, The Grigori Cycle.
Yeah, so books 1 and 2 have been out for 4 and 1 year, I guess, respectively. This is a series about a woman's search for her missing sister, which leads her to the discovery of a sinister secret society of magic users in Cleveland, Ohio. I co-wrote the supernatural thriller series with Jess Honard. And so we are working on book 3, which we're envisioning as the final book in that trilogy. And then I'm also working on a sequel to Flightless right now. And then I am also working on my first sci-fi, which is sort of a Firefly meets the Music Man. So I'm having fun with all of those projects.
You definitely stay busy, and I'm looking forward to having you and Jess on in the future as soon as I get a chance to actually read those two. Give a shout out, tell us a little bit more about your Sandia Starforgers retreats and workshops and where people can find info about that.
Definitely. So this will be our 4th year in 2027. It's a small, intimate retreat on a historic farm in the South Valley of Albuquerque. It lasts basically a long weekend from a Friday through a Monday, and it comes with small group critique and classes and all meals, all sorts of good stuff, just lots of time to kind of connect with other writers. And our instructors in the past have been folks like Rebecca Rowanhorse, Diana Foe from Erewhon Books. We've had Dongwon Song and also actually Kate McKean, who are both agents at Howard Moorheim Literary Agency. And this year, for 2027, I'm excited that our instructional staff includes Mary Robinette Kowal, Sarah Gailey, and Primi Mohammed, as well as Jeff Habiger of Artemisia Publishing in Tijeras, New Mexico, and myself. They're just really superstars. I can't wait to have that happen. But more information can be found at starforgers.com. There's a scholarship as well that I invite folks to apply for.
I will put a link to that and to your website in the show notes so people can find out more. Where else can people find you and your books?
marieparks.com is a good place to find more information about Flightless and my other novels, Unrelenting and Undeniable. I'm most active on Instagram and Blue Sky, and those links are there on that website. And I'm just so grateful for the chance to chat with you, DelSheree, and thank you so much for taking the time to read Flightless and inviting me on.
Thank you for taking the time. I know you have a lot going on, so I appreciate fitting this in, being able to get to know you and chat.
Absolutely my pleasure. Thank you so much.